How are you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, very excited to come to you here live on April 25th, officially the first day of the NFL Draft. It seems like we've been waiting for this day for a long time. Now it's finally here. I can talk about it more in depth today. I have a few things in line for today's episode. I have the last bit of draft notes and just updates on what's going on around the league, what's being heard, potential hints as to what could come later today via reports and stuff like that. I'll give you some of those. Then we'll move on to an interview JJ McCarthy did this week on the Adam Schefter podcast, talking about the teams that could draft him and just his overall feelings from some of those teams and his reactions to being drafted by any one of those teams. I'm going to get into that as well. Then in the second half of the episode, I've split it up into one conjoined segment. In the third slot, I'm going to be doing a mock draft, picks 1 through 16, and then in the last segment, I'm going to round it off with the last few picks, 17 through 32. In my first official mock draft this offseason, I've waited till the day of the draft to drop it, to just keep it closer to the date. I'm going to give you guys that towards the end of the show, so stick around and listen to the episode today. Make sure to like and follow and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments during today's show, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcsportsnetwork.net. Using this link, I'm able to see your comments or questions pop up in the chat, and I can read them out loud on air, and then we can carry on the conversation that way. It's more engaging, more interactive that way. It's also a massive help for the show as well as all the other shows across the network. So if you would, please use that link if you have any questions or comments. Once again, the tip and donations link is gsmcspodcast.net. But going back to the first segment, the latest draft day notes before the start of the first round later tonight. There's a lot of things contradicting stories, just reports coming out on quarterbacks, what these teams are feeling, how some of these insiders are shaping out the first round, what they're hearing from in and around the league. And I have a few of them lined up here, and I'm sure there's going to be more, probably right up until the first draft pick is taken. Caleb Williams is taken, I should have said. So these are just the few that I've gathered here beforehand, but it's going to continue on all day. It makes it even more exciting. So getting into the first one that I have written down around the Denver Broncos and their quarterback search around Bo Nix. They've done a lot of work on Bo Nix specifically. Albert Breer of athlonsports.com reported that the Broncos have done a lot of work on him. Like I mentioned, they had an hour-long Zoom meeting with him back in March and a private workout with him as well. Now, that goes back to March, and I'm sure they've continued to still have a close relationship with him, have done an extensive amount of work, not just on Bo Nix, but probably Michael Penix because it falls in their range. But because of their recent acquisition of Zach Wilson and bringing him in, do you think that would change? Like I mentioned, this goes back to March, so there's that aspect of it. But now, because they've done so much work, I think it doesn't really just cross off Bo Nix from the list of being considered to be drafted, but I think it just pushes him down the rung a little bit of maybe waiting till the second round to draft him. I don't think there's going to be that many quarterback-needy teams past the top 10 that feel a need to trade up and get their hands on a Bo Nix, get their hands on a Michael Penix. I think if they just wait it out, it's going to work out the best for their buck. And if some rumors pop out in the second round, maybe they move up then, but I don't think they should in the first round because of Zach Wilson and stuff like that. I think they like Bo Nix, but with bringing in Zach Wilson, maybe getting a trade here or there to move back, I think it'll work out better for the Denver Broncos in the end. But moving on with another story to keep in mind while you're watching the first round and leading up to it, the Las Vegas Raiders general manager Tom Telesco said in his pre-draft press conference that specifically he said, so, yeah, like we have a plan right now to go up if we have to and be aggressive with it. Also said that they're ready to pick at number 13 or move back if that turns out to be the case for them. A lot of rumors have been moving around with the Raiders trading up for a quarterback, staying there, and maybe getting an offensive tackle, which is what I have on my board. But it is interesting that Tom Telesco just says it before the draft leading up to it, because saying it and then adding on that you're going to be aggressive with it could lead some people into believing that they're willing to give up a lot if they really like a quarterback. And I don't think it gets more emotional connection-wise, more strong of a connection than what Antonio Pierce and Jayden Daniels have. If they really, really want to commit to it and Antonio Pierce really believes in Jayden Daniels, which I believe to be the case, then if you can convince Tom Telesco to give up a whole lot to move up to number 2 or number 4, number 3, I think they'd be willing to do it, but it just really depends on the Commanders, who have said that they don't want to trade out, but maybe if they get an amazing offer from the Raiders, as an example, from one of these teams, it could convince them, but it is going to take a huge draft capital load to move from the number 2 pick. I think it's out of their range right now, but anything could happen up until the moment anyone's picked or just in that time being beforehand. We've seen it happen before, so I wouldn't be surprised. And from one quarterback situation, we move on to another. According to the Athletic's Diana Russini, Giants ownership and their quarterback search, how they feel about it might not be how others interpret it as of now. Diana Russini reports that the Giants ownership is reluctant right now to make a move for a quarterback because of that big price tag on Daniel Jones, on his latest contract extension that they just got from him just last year. They got for him, actually. They're a little bit hesitant, reluctant, whatever word you want to use, because of that. It's a lot of money to just go and draft another quarterback right after the year after. And it's important to keep in mind that Joe Schoen didn't draft Daniel Jones, but he did provide him with that contract. He was in those negotiations to, at one moment, think that with the contract negotiations of Saquon and Daniel Jones, he was in there thinking that this was a good deal. So he might not have drafted him, but he gave him a ton of money to be their quarterback. It hasn't really turned out how they would have thought, but he was in that negotiation process, and it is, when you really think about it, it is a tough sell to go and get a quarterback when Daniel Jones will take a hit of nearly $48 million on their cap hit in 2024. So to do that and then get another guy that, again, it is still a rookie, and with the Giants, most of you know my feelings around the Giants and how their roster's built up. I don't think they're ready. So to have an expensive quarterback there, plus another rookie that might not turn out as you would because you're still not ready, I don't see it working out. And the Giants ownership is reluctant about it, but Diana Russini also said that it is more likely for them to trade back than trade up for a quarterback at this point. We'll probably draft a wide receiver, which is what I expect it to be, and make it more of an ideal situation in 2025. But what's more interesting about that, like I mentioned, you have contradicting reports on all these things going on. You hear me say that, and then you get a report from Dan Graziano yesterday on the Giants as well and their quarterback search. And he had another name in mind when it came to the Giants on ESPN yesterday. He said, I've also been told in recent days that the Giants like Penix and might even be willing to take him as high as number 6. There's a lot of chatter flying around, but what is clear is that the Giants have done significant work on the quarterbacks and are very open, if not desperate, to come out of Thursday night with one of them. It's very confusing if you don't follow it, if you don't follow and stay up to date with all these news, what's real, what's not. That's always the biggest question, but it is true that the Giants have done a lot of work on the quarterbacks. You can see that and think, why would they even do that if they're not really considering drafting one? Again, I understand that and see why that could happen, but especially Michael Penix at number 6. I think it's way too early with an offensive line that still has holes in it. Yeah, they've improved with Joe Runyon and stuff like that, or John Runyon, excuse me. But Michael Penix at 6, again, if you really wanted him, I think you could wait. Comparing taking Michael Penix to a Malik Neighbors, who you could get at 6, or a Rome Odunze or somebody like that, comparing the talent and how much they could help you this next year, I think Neighbors blows your expectations out of the water, just compared to what Michael Penix could give you, potentially being a backup and not contributing right away from that aspect. But contradicting reports there, although Diana Rossini did say they're reluctant, their owner said also a few weeks ago that they might be hesitant. He might not be on board completely, but if Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll feel very confident about it, he would support them in any decision that they take. Giving them the full reins to this whole show that the Giants have going on, it is a good thing that he has confidence in them. So while they may be reluctant, it's not impossible for sure. So it's something to keep an eye on as well. And also with the later part of the first round, NFL insider Tony Pauline shared what he was hearing in regards to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he said, I'm told, the Steelers and Broncos are talking trade, as Pittsburgh is another team that is targeting Mitchell and would move up to draft him. Denver at the number 12 overall pick are hearing interest from the Eagles, and now it seems like the Steelers as well. It would be a similar move, Mitchell meaning Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo. It does fit the narrative that I have set for them. I have the corners, offensive tackles starting from 12 and then going on through probably 17. So it does make sense, the range. And the Steelers, if you saw them, followed them in the offseason, they were big fans of Quinyon Mitchell. Mike Tomlin, in specific, seemed to be a big fan of him at the Pro Day, talking with him a lot, really just observing him from a close perspective. So it makes sense. And the Steelers, just on trade talks, I mentioned yesterday, I want to say, that they restructured recently Alex Highsmith's contract to free up $7 million more on top of the $12 million they already had. And the $12 million would have already been enough for all these rookie signings and their contracts, but they added even more on top of that, which connects to this story or connects to the Steelers potentially lining up for a big move, a trade up, or trading for one of the big named receivers like Ayuk or Cortland Sutton in these sort of trade talks. Maybe they might not be discussing a trade up to 12, but if you have the Broncos' attention already, you could start trying to work out a deal for Cortland Sutton. You see the connection there with Russell Wilson, so that makes sense. Freeing up a lot of cap space like that doesn't just happen as a precaution. We felt that we needed to do this. Let's just go out and do it just for the sake of it. This close to the draft, it always has to do with the first round, and it always plays into your plan. There's definitely smoke there, and this much smoke with the Steelers and Tony Pauline saying things like this, and other people have the Steelers potentially drafting a wide receiver. I think it's too much to ignore. The Steelers are making moves to support it. So in the end, I think it just makes too much sense not to think the Steelers are planning something. And if they stay at 20, I think they're having options there. But I expect them secretly to make a move up or try and trade for a player that they really are fond of. And just to wrap it up on this segment on the last draft notes around the first round. The last thing I would say is around the quarterback situation. Again, Diana Rossini from The Athletic mentioned on one of her reports that while the quarterback is cool with Washington, I'm told in his dream world he would reunite with the Raiders coach Antonio Pierce or play under Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. Referring to, again, Jayden Daniels and that connection relating back to the report I mentioned before. Same thing with Diana Rossini and her sources coming from the NFL. It's something to monitor for sure because of that meeting that I mentioned last week with the Commanders having that big top 30 visit with a bunch of quarterbacks and a bunch of prospects. It didn't sit well, at least with Jayden Daniels' agent, and that seemed to ruffle some feathers there. In my opinion, the way I saw it, it didn't seem like Daniels and his agent really went through with that. They didn't really like it, that it was sorted out that way. And yeah, he might be, the word cool could be interpreted very, very different ways. Saying that he's cool with being drafted with Washington isn't the reaction you tend to get from accomplishing your dream and playing for an NFL team. Of course, Jayden Daniels has said that he'd be totally fine with it afterwards, yesterday or into today with these reports. But again, I think there's too much smoke there with the Raiders liking Jayden Daniels, the Commanders bringing in all these quarterbacks at once on short notice. I think there's certainly something there. I think they're going to draft I know they're going to draft a quarterback. I don't think they'll trade it. It's just really now who that quarterback could be, and it's certainly something to watch in that first part, just the second overall pick in the first round later tonight, set to start at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, we'll leave it there and we'll move on with the show. A lot more to talk about. The mock draft, I mentioned my first mock draft of this offseason is coming up later on the show. But beforehand, we're going to get into J.J. McCarthy's interview that he had this week on the Adam Schefter podcast, talking about the Vikings, the Patriots, the Giants. He had a lot to say about all the teams that are rumored with him. So stick around and find out what he said. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.